Thanks very much. It's really good to be here. As Scott said, I'm Rhian Kelly, and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at National Grid. And what I wanted to do today was talk to you about some of the commitments that we've made at National Grid to be a clean, fair, or to support a clean, fair, and affordable energy future. But I'm also a year into this role, and so I thought what I'd actually do at the second bit of the presentation is just share a few reflections of some of the learnings that I picked up in the last year. So let me click on to the first slide. It's absolutely brilliant timing to be here today because we have launched this morning a refreshed set of responsible business commitments in our Responsible Business Charter. We first launched our Responsible Business Charter back in 2020. And what we wanted to do was set out what responsibility means for us at National Grid and show the sort of commitments that we were going to make going into the future. And then that was sort of 3 years ago, and things have evolved, and also the shape of our business at National Grid has changed. So we sold our business in Rhode Island in the States. We sold an 80% share in our gas transmission and metering business, and we also acquired a local electricity network, Western Power Distribution, that is now called National Grid Electricity Distribution. And all of that together just meant it felt right to reset our commitments, to focus on what is really important to us, what's important to our communities, and also what's important to our customers, and kind of keep pace with the very many pressures and changes in the external sustainability market. And as we redid the refresh and thought about the commitments that we want to make as a responsible business, we also undertook a materiality assessment to check what was important to our stakeholders and what was important to us, and to match that then to the commitments that we make. And the other thing we tried to do when we refreshed our commitments was also simplify it. We originally had 5 pillars in our Responsible Business Charter, and we've slimmed that down to 3 areas that we think are most material and where we can make most difference at National Grid in terms of being a responsible business and sustainability. The environment, customers and communities, and also people. And underneath that then we have a final sort of block that's about our responsible business fundamentals. So it's about how we run the day-to-day business. And it's sort of the things that you'd expect from us, in many ways almost the table stakes. And so if you put all of this together then, what we think it does for us is it reinforces our vision to be at the heart of a clean, fair and affordable energy future. So let me talk you through some of these commitments and go through those pillars. I'm not going to drain it, don't worry. I'm not going to go through every single commitment. I'm just going to give you the highlights to give you a sense of what we're trying to do. So the first one on the environment, I'm absolutely delighted that we've been able to sign up to 1.5 degree aligned near-term targets across National Grid. Previously, we had signed up to targets that were aligned to well below 2 degree pathway. And then in some of our UK business units, we'd been able to get it to 1.5. But we've been working very hard to make sure that across the whole of the group, so that's all of our businesses here, but we also have 50% business in the US, that all of our business is now aligned to a 1.5 degree emission reduction pathway. And this is absolutely in line with our strategy and with our investment programs. We've then thought not only about ourselves, but we've looked, well, how do we work and reduce emissions down our supply chain? So we provided clarity on how we're going to work with our supply chain, both in the UK and the US. Slightly different approaches because they're just different jurisdictions, but nevertheless, a focus on reducing the emissions, not only ours, but also down our supply chain. And in our environment pillar, the other thing we have focused on is nature. And we've refreshed our commitments on nature, focusing on the land we use and what we can do in the UK to protect our natural environment. And in the US, in the UK, what we can do to restore our natural environment. In the US, what we can do to protect our natural environment. Across the whole of the Responsible Business Charter, we've tried to create commitments that are global. But in this one particular instance, and I think there's one other as well, we've slightly taken a different approach for the UK and the US, in part because we don't have all that much natural environment here, so it is really a question of restoring it. In part because where we work in the US and New England and New York, there is plenty of natural environment, and it is actually therefore about protecting it. So let me come to the second pillar, customers and communities, where what we want to do is support an affordable and fair energy transition and make sure that nobody is left behind. We already do a lot of work to mobilise hardship funds and deliver energy efficient measures, and we're going to do more of that. But what we also want to do is sharpen up the reporting and illustrate exactly the sort of impact we have had in terms of households and number of people impacted by these measures. It was only a refresh, so some of the commitments remain the same. So we are going to still provide meaningful skills development for 45,000 people by 2030. But with a focus on communities facing social economic disadvantage. And what we want to do is use our Grid for Good programs really to zoom in on the communities where they haven't had the opportunity or maybe haven't considered working for an organisation like National Grid or in the energy sector. Because partly we want a more diverse workforce, but also we need new thinking, new diverse ways of thinking. We don't have all the solutions for how we get to net zero, and we will need people with fresh thinking to come into our business. We also, as employees, want to be represented, want to know, and want to be involved in our communities. So we've committed to 500,000 hours of volunteering by 2030. And then finally, new in this pillar is also that we want to show what customers think about us and be more transparent about our customer satisfaction scores across all of our business areas. So then let me turn to the third pillar, people. A big focus of this pillar is what we want to do on diversity, equity and inclusion. And what we've launched today, we've committed to achieving 35% gender diversity and 20% ethnic diversity in our management population by 2025. That's a tick up of 1.5% and 3% respectively. And we're also looking at our new talent programs, because as I say, we want to bring in more diverse candidates into our organisation. So what we want to aim for is 50% female representation and 40% ethnic representation in our new talent population by 2025. So our apprenticeship programs, our graduate programs. New for this Responsible Business Charter as well, we also want to aim to lead in well-being, and we want to have metrics to support that show that we're above the norm. And we've also committed, as you'd expect, that pay is equitable for all of our colleagues. So then the final bit, if those are the three key pillars, this final bit underneath, it's the sort of business fundamentals, the sort of table stakes, the things that we should be doing regardless, and they underpin our Responsible Business Charter. And they're about how we run the business, they're about how we engage with our supply chain. And we've taken a particular focus on resilience, on human rights, on ethics and governance for ourselves, but also for those that we work with. And it's also worth adding here that we fully integrate our responsible business commitments into the way we performance manage the business. So it isn't just something that's in a charter, it actually percolates all the way down through the business, all the way down through our management, and all the way down into the people at the operational level of our business. And it also links in with our remuneration policy, which has an increased focus in the last couple of years on ESG, and includes the reductions we make in absolute Scope 1 emissions, but also the way in which we can enable net zero, as well as diversity, equity and inclusion metrics. And then underpinning all of this is the role that we at National Grid play at the heart of the energy transition, and it's the record level investments that we are making across our networks. So in the past year alone, we invested 7.7 billion. That was up 1 billion from the previous year, and 75% of that is aligned with the EU taxonomy. What we set out in the Charter today is our commitment by 2026 to invest £29 billion in the energy transition, which makes us one of the FTSE's biggest investors in the delivery of net zero. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the Charter, why we've refreshed it, and what's important to us. I'd urge you to read it. I haven't covered everything, but I've given you the highlights. But in the second bit of the presentation, I just thought I'd cover some of my reflections in a year into the job and some of the things that I've learnt. So the first one really is that sustainability, ESG, responsible business, whatever you want to call it, is really quite strategic. Of course it's about our own impact, and of course it's about reducing your emissions. But what I found is it's far, far wider, broader role than that. And I think in the past it may have been seen as just about this emissions team that worried about emissions data and reducing emissions, sort of sitting in the corner. That's not my experience at all of the way it was operated in the last year. It's actually about the National Grid strategy. It's about how that strategy gets percolated through to the business. It's about how we engage with our investors. It's about how we involve our communities in the projects that we're undertaking. So I have found it to be a very strategic role that covers all across the National Grid businesses. The second sort of observation I've had is that we need support, both internally and externally. So you can't have a sustainability team in an organisation like National Grid and think it's just our problem. What we've needing to do in terms of delivering the emissions reductions, the nature strategy, is work hand in hand with everybody across the business. So we need allies across the business to actually pull the levers to get some of our commitments met. But also externally, we'll need to work with other partners. You'll all have seen the lovely graphs where this is the emissions reduction, and they're just straight line trajectories. And I think what we said in our responsible business report this year was it might not always be a linear trajectory to get to net zero and to hit our emissions reduction targets. And in some instances, we'll actually need to work with policymakers, regulators, elected officials, especially given that we're a regulated utility. To make these reductions, we can't do it all on our own. We'll need support from others. And this is the case both here in the UK, but also, as I said, we've got big business in the US, so we'll need to work with the federal government, with the New York and New England state governments as well to achieve emissions goals. And then my third sort of thought is around disclosures. Our Responsible Business Charter is a very strategic document and sets out our commitments over the next 3 years. And every year, we then report on the performance against those commitments through our annual Responsible Business Report. And obviously, this is a big undertaking, and I think increasingly will be going forward a big undertaking in terms of making sure you've got the right data, making you've assured it in the right way, and working out what are voluntary disclosures that you want to make, what are mandatory, and what do the mandatory ones mean for you. And I guess there'll be people in the room who are probably grappling with the CSRD in Europe and what that means. So I feel that disclosures and assurance are going to be a key theme through sustainability in the coming years. And what I say often inside National Grid is that we need to get to a place where our sustainability data is financial grade and sits alongside the financial data in exactly the same way and is exactly the same grade of data. The other thing that I wanted to reflect on is don't forget the S in ESG. I feel that there's been a real focus on the E part of it, the environment, emissions reduction. But what I can see is a slowly increasing interest externally, it's particularly, say, from our investors, on the S of ESG. And with that in mind, one of the things that we did last year that I'm really proud about is we set aside 50 million for an energy support fund to help the most vulnerable in our communities through the energy crisis, the cost of living crisis, both here in the US last winter and this winter. And we work with key charities in the UK to do a number of things. Firstly, provide emergency financial relief to households. So we supported the Fuel Bank Foundation and Citizens Advice, literally giving people top-up, supporting them, giving top-up cards for people running out of gas on their prepayment meters. We also work with a number of other organisations that provide sort of more medium, long-term support to put energy efficiency measures into people's homes and to sort of give more general advice on how you go about managing energy bills, payments and debt. And we created a video, so I'm really hoping now that when I click the green button, you'll get a 2-minute video of what this looks like for us.
So like lots of organisations, we're unfortunately at the cutting edge of the cost of living crisis. That's helping families for whom, well, to be honest, there's no way forward for them. They can't see any light at the end of the tunnel. They're bedeviled by debt. They can't afford to charge their prepayment meters.
We get emails daily from people who need help. We have people who have terminal illnesses and yet are living in the dark. We have people whose kids can't study at home because they can't afford the Wi-Fi routers going.
Citizens Advice is experiencing a record-breaking demand for our services as people struggle with the cost of living crisis. we are seeing a significant increase in the need for energy advice. In 2022, we've helped more people who are unable to top up their prepayment meter than we have done in the past 6 years combined.
I'm really pleased to say that we've recently announced a £50 million package of support in the UK and $17 million in the US, where we're working with some frontline organisations to provide blue light services, so direct support to those that need it right now. We've got a partnership with Affordable Warmth Solutions, with the Fuel Bank Foundation, Citizens Advice, National Energy Action and National Energy Foundation. Each of them are doing slightly different things, but together we've got a real nice network of support that can be made available to those who need it the most, and that will run through to the next 18 to 24 months.
Between these organisations, we will help hundreds of thousands of households with a range of measures. These include prepayment vouchers to help with paying the bills for those most in need, loft and wall insulation to keep homes warmer this winter, items to help with energy efficiency such as smart thermostats, warm hubs to offer a place of refuge for communities during the coldest spells, winter warmth packs, and a range of advice to help people to access the support they need.
So to National Grid colleagues, I guess I'd like to say thank you. It may seem an obvious thing to say, but you have no idea the impact that funding like this can have. To say that it saves lives is an understatement. We know that for every single person that we help, at least another 3 people are directly helped.
From NEA, it's a huge thank you to Grid. So National Energy Action, everything we do in partnership, mainly with energy companies, obviously with suppliers, but also with companies like Grid who aren't that intimately connected with domestic householders, don't have that billing relationship. But I know that there's the will and the compassion and the commitment across the energy sector to be bigger than the sum of our parts.
We'd like them to understand what the challenges are that low-income households are facing, and some way know where they can refer those customers. It could be parents, grandparents, or extended family. So I think National Grid employees have a big part to play.
We'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone at National Grid for their support. We are really excited to work in partnership to help people find a way forward during a time of real need.
I'd just like to say to National Grid employees, we all work in the same sector. The folk we're supporting are really struggling, but they'll be struggling less with your support, so thank you.
So I hope you found that useful, and it actually links to my final sort of reflection of 1 year in the role. You may well know that I come from a communications background, and I think I found this particularly helpful because part of what I think sustainability, ESG, responsible business professionals need to be able to do is tell the story. So it's about better communications. And what I found is you need a golden thread, you need a narrative, you need a purpose, and you need an approach to everything you do. And that you also need to think about sort of appealing to a diverse set of stakeholders. So, for example, if I think about the role, then I think it's our internal colleagues, I think it's investors, I think, as you'll not be surprised to know, and I've mentioned before, policymakers, but they all need something a little different. And so targeted and tailored communications, I think, is really important because it deepens that engagement and that understanding. And we've also used different channels. So this was on our social media channel. I'm trying to sort of bring the content to life for people in different ways, again, to sort of deepen that understanding and engagement. The other thing I would say is it's very much two-way. If we want to understand our communities, if we want to understand what fairness means to our communities and our customers, we need to be listening. So it's very much a two-way interaction, and about how we bring stakeholders with us and how we are held to account for our delivery. And one of the things that comes to mind here is that we will need to be building quite a lot of new infrastructure to bring the wind from the offshore, from the North Sea into the network. and we will therefore need to be putting new infrastructure in communities that might not have hosted that community for. And so it's very important that we are listening to those communities and engaging with them and making sure they benefit from hosting this infrastructure. Another thought in terms of communications is about literally making our charter available to our communities. So for the first time, we've translated the charter. We have it in American English. We're also translating it into Spanish for our US communities and in Welsh because WPD, National Grid Electricity Distribution, have plenty of customers in Wales who want to read it in Welsh. And the other benefit of this storytelling, I think, is about the way you engage your employees and also the way you attract talent. What we find a lot is that employees in our organisation want to know that they're working in an organisation that has greater purpose and that does meaningful work and that shapes society. That's what drives a lot of people that work at National Grid. But we also find that's what drives people who want to come and work for us. And so quite frequently, if people have thought about working for National Grid, applied for a job, one of the things you often find they've read is our Responsible Business Charter. And then very finally, my other bit on communications, particularly at sort of internal and at an operational level, we found the need to sort of translate some of our commitments into things that matter to people on the ground. So, for example, we don't always talk about CO2 equivalent. We started talking about it in terms of miles of leak-prone pipe that we're going to replace, or the number of EVs that we're going to put into our fleet. It just, I think, makes it tangible to those people who are actually on the front line helping us support these commitments. So that's everything from me. I hope you found that helpful and a useful sort of insight both into the commitments that we've made at National Grid, but also some of my reflections. And I don't know whether we've got time for questions or a discussion of whether we were going to do that. No. Sorry about that, everybody, but I hope you found this very useful. Thank you very much for bearing with me.